Welcome back to the set of the Talk of Paris for this special edition on the Obama Revolution, the election of the first black president, a turning point in American history. But after the euphoria of victory, what freedom of maneuver will Barack Obama have? One of the best specialists on America is Pierre Lellouche, a graduate of Harvard and a member of the Defense Committee of the French National Assembly. Pierre Lellouche, as America turns the page, as it ends the Reagan era and the end of the George W. Bush presidency, is it the end of unilateralism? Is it really the start of a new era?
I think it's more complicated than that. I think the end of Reaganism was, the markets. It was the financial crisis that brought it about, much more than the change in power in Washington. It's a collapse of the financial system and a certain hands-off policy in market regulation. That's what's gone away, and it's created the requirement to rebuild another kind of Bretton Woods, maybe a world central bank. We'll see after the meeting of the G20. With respect to American unilateralism, I'd say it was dead after the first term of Bush, because it was the beginning of the war in Iraq, and that brought about very serious consequences and a huge isolation for the United States. And the second term is, in fact, much more middle of the road than it appears to be, even if Bush himself continued to suffer from a horrible reputation in America as well, a sort of generalized hate, which was really close to hate in certain countries, in fact. And the second term of Bush was much more middle of the road than it appears. Let's take North Korea or even Iran or Libya, relationships with Europe, without talking about the change in his strategy in Iraq and in Afghanistan. So I think the break is going to be much less visible than one might think. In the more difficult questions such as Iraq, Afghanistan, it's probable that Obama will keep the same defense secretary, who is middle of the road, is not an ideologist that Rumsfeld was, not a neoconservative. The departure of Rumsfeld was a break in American foreign policy. Cheney stayed, but the Secretary of State, the Foreign Minister, and the Pentagon, especially the Pentagon, have changed strategies. Now that changed with Gates and General Petraeus, who is now commanding the theaters of Iraq and Afghanistan, probably will remain as well.
The first hot issue for the new president will be relations with Russia. People won't hear of another Cold War, and yet, regarding Georgia, there's a lot of disagreement. When President Medvedev half-heartedly congratulated Obama, he said he would deploy missiles to confront the U.S. anti-missile shield. What's going to happen? What will be the first major crisis for Obama?
I've been worried for a while about the Russians are doing before Georgia happened. They're in kind of a nostalgic voyage, a neo-nationalist type approach, which I think can be dangerous. If we can't put our foot down, they could continue in Crimea and Ukraine. I don't think at all that it's a new Cold War. I don't think Russia's in any condition globally to do that, but it could be a source of concern, especially if they continue to throw their weight around as they did in Georgia. Here again, we're at the beginning of a new kind of nuclear blackmail, but which is without effect because nobody wants to get into the game of power struggles with Russia. Russia's trying to use its power where it has it. In other words, it has a nuclear arsenal. But the financial crisis has shown how bad the Russian economy really is. From a population point of view, they're on the decline as well. So I think we shouldn't fall into this trap. We have to manage that with a lot of calm, serenity, as Nicolas Sarkozy has done very serenely in handling the Georgian affair, but he needs to set some limits. And what Obama is going to have to do is keep to the middle of the road to avoid, falling into a new Cold War, which some of McCain's advisors wanted to do, such as Bob Keegan, who published a book on the League of Democracies Against Russia, which is absolutely absurd.
Some people say that under Obama, America will be less firm than it would have been under John McCain.
It's not really a question of being less firm. I think the right strategy is between the current European line, but not too much. I mean, I think that Europe has to get a little bit tougher, especially on principles. We absolutely do not want to recognize the annexing of Abkhazia and Ossetia, because if we recognize that, we're going to have problems very soon in Crimea. So I think the dismantling of Ukraine, we can't let this happen in Europe. I think we have to be very firm, but at the same time, we don't want to fall into the trap of mutual escalation. This serves no purpose, and I think that Russia deserves better than that. I really think that Russia needs to be part of the democratic world, and Russia has to be given that chance. We don't want to switch into military power struggles what the current regime actually wants.
So we know that the world is full of pitfalls for Barack Obama, and he has understood this himself. Let's listen to an extract of the speech he made on the evening of his victory, and this was recorded by Juliette Igier and Julia Dorner.
We know the challenges that tomorrow will bring are the greatest of our lifetime. 2 wars, a planet in peril, the worst financial crisis in a century. Even as we stand here tonight, we know there are brave Americans waking up in the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan to risk their lives for us. There are mothers and fathers who will lie awake after their children fall asleep and wonder how they'll make the mortgage, or pay their doctor's bills, or save enough for their child's college education. There's new energy to harness, new jobs to be created, new schools to build, and threats to meet, alliances to repair.
So, we can see that he's very worried about the 2 wars. Won't one of the first things the new president will ask the Europeans and Nicolas Sarkozy will be to send more troops to Afghanistan, for example?
That's certainly possible. I think that he won't be able to accelerate the withdrawal of troops from Iraq as fast as he'd like. I don't think Iraqis are ready for that. They need at least 12 to 15 months before we can have a substantial pullout. The idea is to get back some of those forces so they can send them to the Afghan front. In Afghanistan, where I was working recently on an assessment report, we are confronted with a situation where outside of Great Britain and France and Canada, but outside of Great Britain and France, Europe does not want to participate in the war. They're vaguely there, if I can put it that way, symbolically there, which means that there's a huge imbalance. It also means that if we want to co-pilot this and to avoid some errors on the part of the U.S. command, collateral damages and so forth, I think we really will need to do more. And that's going to be hard for us. It's a very risky operation. It's not popular in France, and the President of the French Republic will have some hard decisions to make on this.
But won't Obama's popularity make it easier for Nicolas Sarkozy to make choices, notably on Afghanistan?
In the case of NATO, certainly, because you know that we're talking about reintegration, as it were, the full return of France into NATO, which is to be announced in the Kiel summit next spring. So we're going to have to prepare public opinion for that. The fact that Obama is very well perceived in France is certainly going to help Nicolas Sarkozy with respect to the rejoining NATO. In terms of Afghanistan, it's more complicated. We're going to have to convince the French that it's a fair war, it's just, it's useful, and also we have to have some political exit strategies. And the negotiation process with some Afghani Talibans that are nationalists, which started under Karzai, has to be pursued. We have to talk about the drug problems. If we can transform, if Pakistan can be part of the solution and not part of the problem, if they help us to get insecurity down in Afghanistan, then we might have the right conditions so that France and the U.S. and the Europeans can play perhaps a more useful role. For the moment, there's no getting around the fact that Afghanistan is in an impasse. The Taliban have managed to create a very strong climate of insecurity, which makes reconstruction difficult. We are stopping them from taking Kabul, that's for sure. But we can't reduce them, and there is an impasse.
In foreign policy, what should be Obama's priority? What will be his priority?
I think the beginning is really you have to win the confidence of Main Street and Wall Street.
Yes, that's for America, but what about foreign
Well, there's a
policy?
whole international finance aspect and international trade as well. It's not clear. How far will the Democratic Party go in helping reconstruct a financial system and a new global trade agreement? Because the risk, unemployment
Is
is
it
going to be
even
on the
greater with
rise.
Obama than with McCain?
Probably Democrats have a more protectionist tradition. The first problem that will have to be dealt with at the crossroads of national and international policy is that there are only problems internationally. Iraq, Afghanistan, very difficult situations, and Russia's decided to be a nuisance, a real problem. We're going to have to try to nudge Russia in the right direction, which is not going to be easy to do, because Russia itself is suffering from fallout from the financial crisis and the decline in the cost of raw materials. And China is a huge problem because the United States absorbs most of the Chinese industrial production, and America is going to import less because they don't have the money. So there's going to be a problem for the Chinese as well. And in terms of the Near East, everything needs to be redone. There are going to be elections in Israel where you have a political system in the Near East which is decapitated. There's no more Israeli leadership. There's a leadership in Palestine that's extremely weak. And in the midst of all that, you have extremist groups such as Hamas, Hezbollah, which are more or less manipulated by Iran. So add to this list of horrors the nuclear issue in Iran, which is maturing. The more time goes past, the closer they're getting to having the bomb, and once they have it, they'll have that critical mass, and there'll be no backing off.
George Bush said just now that he was pleased that the transition was going smoothly, but in fact there will be a real transfer of power between two teams. Is it true that this transition is smooth, will be smooth between
That's the
Obama and George
American
Bush?
Tradition. I think so. Everybody's aware that this is urgent. And starting with the summit on the 15th of November, we're going to know if the transition team is at the summit, then this is a very positive sign. If Nicolas Sarkozy is able to work with Obama right away, that's very important. Usually the new administration sets up in 2 months and they start being operational towards May, June. Here, frankly, given all the issues we're confronted with that we've listed, we don't have time to wait until June. The world is waiting American decisions and American positions on all of these issues. Without being alarmist, we've rarely seen, at least in the 30 years that I've been involved in foreign policy, I've rarely seen this combination of economic, financial crisis and the unemployment crisis, which is going to be upon us, insecurity because several wars going on. We didn't talk about the wars in Africa, which are devastating, and terrorist pressure, authoritarian governments which are in good position. So all of that is a very bad recipe, and President Obama said it on the night of his election. It's going to be hard.
Hence the importance of transatlantic relations between Europe and the United States. Let's listen to Professor Suleiman of Princeton University, who has a message for Europeans. We interviewed him a few minutes ago. Let's listen to him.
I would say to the Europeans not to try, not to have too many illusions, to remain realistic in that Obama has often said that he believes in America's preeminence and believes that this preeminence is essential for world stability, and that the United States is a power for freedom and democracy. These are not just words. He truly and fundamentally believes this. And I think that this attitude could come into conflict, not a severe conflict like before, but I think he may disappoint.
So we mustn't delude ourselves.
It's clear that he was elected by Americans to solve, first of all, American problems. If the European thinks that the U.S. has elected a European president, they're wrong. However, the Obama mania, that fascination, can be explained by true reasons. The first thing, he's black. black, and this provides closure to the Civil War. This is a new chapter in the United States, which is going to be multicolored, which is going to look like the world, very multicultural. And this is very important. This is a signal towards continents such as Africa, which have been neglected forever, and that feel now that they're back in the world. In politics, symbolism matters. Symbols matter even if there are policies that are really national.
Just now on France 24, Hubert Védrine was saying that in Europe there is excessive Obama mania and we don't understand what's happening.
I disagree. It went way beyond that. My roommate at Harvard was black. At the beginning of affirmative action, for a black student to come and study at Harvard, that was a revolution 30 years ago. But today, 40 years after Martin Luther King, that the American president is black, this is a real revolution in American history. There were a million deaths in the Civil War because of amongst other issues, there was the racial issue. So a chapter is being closed in American history, and it's the beginning of a new America, much more open to the world in one way or another, because the white community is, in fact, becoming a minority and will be in the next 20 to 30 years. So that's a major change. Secondly, what I'm interested in the Obama mania in Europe and in the world, especially in Europe, is that implicitly it reveals a need for American leadership, because everybody realizes that a multipolar world, we love that word, multipolar in France. Remember, whether it be Villepin-Chirac, it's going to be great. We're going to have a multipolar democratic world. I never believed that, because multipolar worlds never worked in history. It always led us to work, but let's forget that. On the side of French democracy, we believed that Europe would be a pole next to China, the United States, Brazil, but it's more complicated than that, because these poles are not equal. And also, basically, this doesn't work. It doesn't work well anyway. There are poles that are more or less hesitant, and others are not necessarily contributing to global security. Ask the Russians and the Chinese, for example. So in the Obama mania, there is behind that an expectation for American leadership, but this time it needs to be enlightened leadership, benevolent leadership. I don't know. That's where we might be disappointed, because Obama, we don't know much about his ideas on foreign policy. He has a very short national experience of 2 years, so a lot's going to depend on his advisors and his history. We'll see. But I think that underlying all of that, there's a strong expectation for leadership. So it's up to us to show that we are able in Europe to have clear ideas. If we have clear ideas, then maybe we can influence the U.S. usefully.
So, beware of disillusion. Thank you, Pierre Lellouche, for having been our guest. Join us again next week for another edition of The Talk of Paris. See you soon.